Okay, hello and welcome everyone to another episode of Masculinity Unmasked, the fortnightly conversation that delves deep into what it means to be a man in the 21st century. So, as always, I'm joined by my co-host and fellow coach, Greg Styan. Hi, Greg.
Hi guys, how's it going?
Hey, good, thank you. And this evening, we're very fortunate to have with us a certified strength coach, Steve Barrett. Hi, Steve. And the topic for today's conversation is from chaos to culture, leading without losing yourself. Steve, thanks very much for joining us this evening. Do you want to start by sharing a little bit about yourself and the sort of work that you're involved in?
Yeah, sure, I'd love to. I'm Steve Barrett. I work with fast-growing businesses and I help them to build effective leadership and sustainable cultures within their organizations through the positive psychology way and the whole world of strengths, ideally. And then prior to that, I had a 30-year career in leadership, so various roles up to operations director, different sectors and different sizes of business as well.
Wow, there's a lot there, which is really interesting already that I just want to dive in and unpack. We could delve into that story a little bit and start there.
Yeah, I'm happy to share. I guess it's been ups and downs is probably the best way to describe it. So I've had highs, I've had a successful career, but there's obviously quite a few low points within that as well. So including, at the age of 30, I was bankrupt. So I've had bankruptcy. I bounced back from that. I've been made redundant before and I bounced back from that. And again, I've experienced some, challenges in personal life as well. And again, managed to bounce back to where I am today.
Mhm. Wow.
Powerful stuff. Steve, I love the story that you had. And it made me really think about being reborn. From the data that I know, when it comes to redundancy, men are twice as likely to be made redundant, and they find it a lot harder post 40, we could say. But can a man be reborn professionally and personally after hitting rock bottom? So where did you find the strength? What did you use to bounce back from that?
I think you've got a choice, haven't you, in those situations? I think you have to make an active decision about, are you gonna bounce back or are you not? I guess it is tougher for guys, and I think that's a whole thing about, this whole male culture that we don't show our emotions, we don't talk to people, we don't seek help, because I think particularly the generation I'm part of, it just was, that's the way it is. You just, you get on. I think for me, it was a case of, it was always a conscious decision that, when you get kicked down, you've got a choice. You stay down or you get yourself back up. And I think by focusing on getting back up and believing you can get back up, then guess what? You get up, and you get up pretty quickly.
Absolutely.
Right. So much noise even now, right? Around toxic narratives and masculinity. But you were saying, that generational piece for you. And I appreciate you just got back up. But how did you quieten that noise and move through that pain? I mean, bankruptcy, redundancy, that must have been really painful experiences. What was the process for you there? Was it a
Yeah,
challenge?
I think it's tough. It's tough. They're tough situations. I mean, I think particularly the bankruptcy. When I'd always done all right. From the age of 18 and working up to 30. Worked hard, got a fairly good salary, fairly good position by that age. Had my own business. I think the first thing that I did, I had to own it. That actually it was my fault that I was in that position. It was mistakes that I'd made that put me in that position. I think when you take ownership of something, then it makes it a learning experience, but then it does make it a challenge to come back, because you don't want the odd mistake in life or the odd low point to define your whole life. So I think that was probably the driving force. And then there's just self-belief that, I can come back from this and I can come back stronger and come back as a better person as well.
Wow. That's amazing, Steve. That's such a great answer. So, when I think of redundancy and I think of some of these aspects that you talk about, I think of almost like an identity crisis, and I think men all have that. So what are those aspects? What are those things that can trigger an identity crisis? Is it loss of routine? What other sort of things sort of lead into that? And is this common ground amongst men?
I think it is. I mean, look, there's a whole thing in society, isn't it? I mean, if you think of, you meet a stranger, what's the first question you usually ask them? Oh, what do you do? And I think that's probably the dangerous narrative that too many people allow themselves to be defined by the job that they do. And I think if you allow your job and your role and the company you work for and the salary that you get to be the definition of you, then absolutely, it's going to kick the guts out of you if it happens. And so I think for me with the redundancy, the roles I did was never what defined me and who I was. It was a part of life. So I think that aspect probably made it easier for me, I think.
So much power in that, isn't there? That enmeshment that we often have with job or with situation, and having that objectivity is so powerful. We all go through pain in our life. Pain is inevitable, but the suffering is that layer that we add on top, the blame or the victimhood or whatever it is that we decide to add on top, so we can sort of accept the pain almost, or accept the situation we're in, but have that objectivity. It's only gonna help. It's interesting because you were talking as well before we came on around your scars, these scars, and how they help you now in the work that you do. And I'm really interested in that, how these experiences have helped shape the work that you do with people now.
Yeah, I think it's I don't know, maybe it's a part of growing up, getting older. Not that I ever accept that I've grown up or got older, really. But I think if you've had those experiences, if you've had those failings, if you've been through some of the tough stuff, it makes it far easier to be able to relate to people when they're talking to you about it. So people are more likely to open up. And I think because I've always been willing to sort of show that vulnerable side. So, I don't mind talking about the mistakes that I've made because, they're my mistakes. So why would I hide them? And actually good stuff has come from them as well. But it definitely helps in the work that I do with businesses now, because I think, if I'm going into businesses to coach people, to support people, it's far easier to do if I'm speaking the same language, if I can, when people are talking about the pain points, if I can empathize with those pain points, because, I've seen I've been in those same trenches, I've taken those same knocks, I've faced that same stuff that they're facing, just makes it far easier to relate to. And I think, coaching's all about building trust, isn't it? And that's a good way to build trust if you're talking to a guy who's, they've been there too, but, he gets it.
Yeah, really, really interesting. Steve, when I looked over, your background and everything that you talked about, it's like the idea that, you're a seasoned survivor, and you can communicate, you can be in the trenches with these guys, like a strategic sage, if you like. But communication is obviously one massive aspect of that. But is there any other valuable tools or tactics or strategies that you use? Imagine that for the people in my communities, the people that me and Max work with, any great take homes, any strategies that they can embody or take on if they're going through a similar struggle?
I think for me, I've always been a believer in the real uniqueness of people. And I think because I believe in the uniqueness of people, I believe that anyone's capable of so much, but you're only really capable of, you can only really live up to that if you do things in an authentic and natural way and the right way for you as well. And I think that's always been a key factor. One of the things I've always done is I've done it my way. And there's obviously there's always been lots of critics. Could my career have gone further if I'd tried to play the politics game a little bit more? Yeah, of course it would. Was I comfortable doing that? No, not for me, thanks. So I think you've got to live your life your way, and I think if you're aligned to what makes you and your personal values, and you live in that way, it definitely helps in all those situations.
Yeah,
I love that.
yeah. And one of the tools that you talked about before coming on, and just looking at your website, that you use, it appears, to channel that uniqueness, to look at things through that uniqueness lens, is the strength-based leadership model, the Gallup strength-based leadership model. So it'd be really interesting to speak to that, what that entails in your work and how you use it.
Yeah, so it's I could talk about that for hours. So, but keeping it short. I think the one thing I always had an issue with in my career was, these whole things about when it talks about development, people will always look at, what aren't you very good at, and let's make you do more of what you're not very good at because you'll get good at it. No, you won't. You'll just become less rubbish at it. What the whole strengths thing is right. Let's identify, what makes you that inner superhero, and then let's help you, really own those talents, turn them into strengths, and work with it and do it more. And when people do it more, there's a couple of things that happen. They're more engaged in what they're doing because it's completely natural, and they get much better results. And if you're engaged in something and you're getting better results, then literally everyone's a winner with it. It's such a powerful tool, and it's not just about work. Clients that I've worked with it in the coaching, although we'll be talking about work, they'll report about how it's changed their personal lives as well, whether it be relationships at home, just relationships in life, because you're the same person, aren't you? It's not like you become you're not like Superman in the office and Clark Kent at home. It's the same in a person. And I think helping people to connect with them true selves and their best self and just bring their best self into every situation. That's why I love that tool so much.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's amazing. So imagine, how do you go about assessing this? Is it a questionnaire? Is it, do you get to know them? Do you get to shadow them? Talk me through it. So obviously that's going to be a big part, isn't it? Is getting them to open up, getting them to be honest. When you're talking about strengths and weaknesses for a guy, that's quite difficult stuff, So how do you go about that? How do you get them to open up?
Yeah, so there's an assessment which people take, which produces an individual report of the full 34 themes in the right specific order for that person. So that kind of gives a basis to it. But one of the things I always try to do first, if I'm engaging in coaching, is work out what it is the person wants to achieve before they've seen those strengths, because the strengths don't define what you can achieve. It's just about how you achieve it and the best way to achieve it for you. And I think by doing it that way, it's a case of, whatever the goal is that the person wants to go at, we have that goal. We just then have all this rich data and this rich knowledge that we can really work with to help them achieve that goal in the best way for them.
Yeah. Straight down what you just said there, that it don't define what you're achieving, but how you go about doing it. And I think that's so powerful, isn't it? Because a lot of the psychometrics tell us the type of person we are and how we work best. I'm thinking, like, for example, disc profiling. Some people that are really analytical, some people that are more influential. So we can channel that in teams, which is a large part of your work, right? We can help facilitate change and drive that forward on a larger scale than just the individual level. So I'm really curious, because I don't think we've had someone on yet who does that sort of work at that wider level, that organizational level. So I wonder if you could speak to this work on that level.
Yeah, so it's I think the way I kind of look at it in its most powerful, if you think about how things are in the workplace, typically and traditionally, the leader will create a team of people that are just like them, because they think everyone's got to be the same, and you're either good or you're bad. It's like, this is what the leader looks like. We need people that look like that. Actually, that's rubbish. It doesn't work that way. The whole thing with the strengths-based approach is you look at difference as a positive thing. So actually, you want people that are completely different to you because it complements you. So, I bring these strengths to the table, you bring those strengths to the table. And then you've got, the whole team dynamic. So it's almost like people look at that guy or that girl across the office and go, oh, actually, that they're great in this way. This is their A game. That's what they bring. I could do with speaking to them now, because they'd probably be a great person to work with me on this or to help me with that. And that's where it becomes so powerful. So it actually has positive impacts around even things like DEI, because again, it's that whole notion that difference is a good thing, not a bad thing.
Yeah.
And you imagine a team of people, where you've got this team with diverse talents that are, aligned and all working in their most effective way individually, but also in an effective way collectively as well.
Yeah.
And getting recognized by the leader for, using their individual strengths. So guess what they do? It's like, they want to do it a little bit more, because, they'll play with it more, they'll push it more. And then, then you've got this real super team mentality.
That's amazing. I loved what you talked about, goal setting. And it's interesting here, we're all coaches, we're all had our moment of being rock bottom, if you like. While everyone's story is different, I resonated with sort of a lot of the stuff that you said, Steve. And with that comes grit, and this idea of like future time perspective. I love that idea of how when you understand where you want to be, it helps you understand a little bit more about the now, and why you act, why you're driving, why you're doing this, why you're feeling, So how did you get yourself out of that hole, Steve? How did you get yourself out from being rock bottom? Obviously, you can't lead others down a path unless you've walked it yourself. You found something out. You worked something out about dragging yourself out of bed, getting yourself through this. Talk me through that goal setting, that future time perspective. Imagine that, someone who's listening to this is going for a hard time, how would you want them to think about their goal in the future?
Wow. Yeah, I think there's a few layers to it. I think the most important one is knowing where you want to get to and what you want to do. And I can
Yeah,
remember at that point, at that point when I was at my lowest, it was a case of, I couldn't even have a bank account. Not a proper bank account. So everything, you're dealing with everything in cash. My car was off the road and I couldn't afford to get it fixed for 6 months. So I was, even having to leave work early to get on the train before there were ticket inspectors, because it was a case of eat at daytime or pay for the train ticket. That's kind of how low it was. But when you got this vision of, I'm going to come back, what I wanted to, this is what I want to achieve, this is where I'm going to get to. It's almost what pulls you forward. So the decisions that you make, and it's not
yeah,
about all this thing people will say, oh yeah, you just pull yourself up, you dust yourself off. It's that BS. Sometimes you can't walk forward, you've got to crawl forward. And it's like little incremental steps. But I think by having that goal of where you want to get to, when you're making decisions, you kind of, the decisions you make will be pulling you towards that goal rather than just random short-term decisions. And then probably the other bit that I'd say is, if you think about decision making, one of the best ways to get out of this paralysis that can happen when you've got to make decisions is, the only wrong decision in life really is one that's not aligned to your values. So if what you're doing is aligned to your values, then it's the right decision, because that future's not written yet. It's down to you to write that future, and kind of how you feel about it. If you've got the boldness to make decisions and push forward, then pretty damn good chance of achieving it.
Absolutely love that. I had something similar. I was coached myself, and funny enough, Steve, you remind me so much of the guy who coached me. But for me, when I was sat down and I was rock bottom, he got me to draw out my life as a movie. He told me to be not just the main character, but the director of it, where you want to be in 1 year's time, 3 years' time, 5 years, 10 years' time. When I knew where I wanted to be and what I wanted to have, I could create a roadmap. That was the strategy, is knowing what I needed to do to get to this position. And again, that's great, fitting into what you're talking about aligning with values and etc. But yeah, I love your story, and I resonate with a lot in there, And it's interesting. We're all sat here as three guys. We've all had our own unique stories in bounced back. What's your thoughts on that, Max?
Mm.
Any of your thoughts on that goal setting?
Yeah, I mean, I think what just struck me about your story, Steve, is just your vulnerability, right? Your openness and authenticity when you're talking about your story, and there's such power in that modeling of vulnerability. So I just want to acknowledge that. And I'm curious, sort of, how you bring that to that team level work that you do. And this kind of ties in with goal setting, because we can think about goals, we can think about where we're headed in an organization, but the people part behind all of that, the vulnerability, the authenticity, that's the fabric, that's the glue that binds everything else together, right? So you're having to hold the two together, this goal setting, this moving forwards, but also the people part. And I'm curious how you do that.
I guess that's the power of coaching, really, isn't it? So, whatever the goal is, the whole thing behind coaching is that it's the individuals that decide what the right route to get there is, and what the right thing for them to do is. So I think that's probably the main bit. But I guess again, I try to, and this is probably what, you picked up on the vulnerability bit. I try to come across as like normal as possible. I think that's the main bit to me. I've always been quite sort of down to earth guy. I don't see myself as, better than anyone else. I'm not into flash fancy stuff. I was at one point, didn't work for me. But as I say, I think because of sort of showing up and just trying to relate to people is an important thing. And it's one of my core strengths. We've got relator as my number 2 strength, and I will be an open book, and I will try and form good relationships with people. And I think that level helps, because people do tend to, and have always tended to sort of open up to me, because I create that safe space for people to do that, and without judgment.
Love that. Love that. That's great. And that brings me on to my next question, talking about the power of coaching. Really intrigued where this name comes from, Black Flag Coaching. Talk us through it. Where was the inspiration? What does it mean? And I absolutely love that, because it's so different.
Yeah, it's good to be a little bit different, right? So actually, it comes from the golden age of piracy. Not the stuff that we see in the movies with hooks as hands, parrots on the shoulder, and that, but how it really was. And if you go back to those times, it was a case of people didn't really have anything. You know, it was a proper sort of dictator type of society. And then you've got these groups of people that basically stood up against whole nations. Pirate ships, if you actually look into this, they're probably one of the most effective democracies that ever happened on the planet, because it was literally, it was one pirate, one vote. They had proper diverse teams. So in times when it was, you know, slavery was still a thing, you know, there were, you know, pirates of different ethnicity. There was even female pirates as well. And those female pirates and those, you know, African descent pirates would still have a vote like everybody else. And the leader was elected, the leader could be unelected. And it was a fair distribution of wealth as well, compared to the Navy at the time, where people might have got paid one day if they were lucky.
I love that. And you've talked to that kind of, or in between the lines earlier when you talked about the importance of DEI at that leadership level. And obviously what's happening now, without getting too political, but there is obviously a regression on DEI. And I wonder, from your experience, what might be the impact of that on leadership and the work that you're doing?
I've probably got to bite my tongue on this a little bit. I don't think I could probably say what I'd want to say with this at the moment. But no, I think it's a real shame. And if we look at where it comes from, it's all about clickbait and votes, isn't it? People all do something and the easiest thing to do is to blame someone who's different. And that's something that I've always found quite a disgraceful way of doing it. But I mean, what a cowardly way of doing it. But I think the real shame with this in the workplace is if you look at what diverse teams achieve, it's proven a diverse team will achieve far more than a team of clones where everyone looks the same and whatever. And it's such a shame if it ever does go backwards. I don't think it will, because I think there's too many good people out there that understand it and see the power of it. But yeah, I mean, it's, businesses that allow it to regress and go backwards, you're going to get what's coming your way, I'll tell you, because you're going to get outdone by people that embrace it and just make the most of difference.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that leads in quite well to I can see there's a lot of change going on. You know, we talked about this, guys, didn't we, before we come on, what we're seeing in the UK, for good or bad. But talk me through a little bit more about that change, Steve. I work with, I've spent a lot of time in America. I work with lots of American clients as well. They have definitely a different concept to us. They speak the same language, but definitely different values for sure. So do you see a change for the better or the worse? And what sort of things have you seen?
I'm not sure I get that one.
That's all right. So, we're talking about diversity and inclusion and stuff like that. So what sort of examples do you deal with, with some of these people that you coach? Is there any trends that you can see, or anything that you can see becoming more regular?
Not that I'm feeling with the businesses that I work with, because I think again, because most of the stuff I do is this strengths-based approach. So again, it is, people, it's almost like people want to understand the people that are within their business and then want to appreciate the difference in those people. So I don't really encounter it too much there. But, in my corporate career, I've seen the toxic side of this. I've seen businesses where, when I've joined, it's a case of everyone's kind of the same. Everyone talks the same. Everyone tries to behave in the same way. And actually you get a pretty toxic culture. And the most powerful thing to do is to almost mix it up a little bit, bring in people who are different, that think different, that do things a different way. And, guess what? You end up with this far more dynamic and respectful organization that goes further. You end up with a meeting where you could have 10 people in the meeting. Suddenly you've got 10 different voices and 10 different opinions. And it's such a powerful thing, because as the leader of those teams, you can almost take a step back and let people debate it out, because you've got all the different views, all the different opinions in the room, and you get such a powerful outcome at the end of it. It can feel a little bit chaotic. It can feel a little bit uncomfortable, but through that discomfort and that chaos comes, real growth, real achievement.
Yeah, that's a really good question. One thing I would say, Max, I know you're a real powerful, strong believer on that topic, EI, and you've been a real advocate of it, on LinkedIn. Some of these posts that you've been putting out are so strong and powerful. Are you seeing a difference, a trend? Are you seeing something that's coming through? I feel that the UK is on a change. Not quite. Still trying to work out whether that's for better or worse. But what do you feel about that? What sort of things are you seeing?
Well, Is that for me?
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like things things are not good in the West and haven't been other parts of the world for a long time. But I think there is a move, and it says I say without turning this into too political, but I think there's a move, very strong move to the far right, and I think that is scary for everybody within organizations, outside of organizations. But I don't think it's a sustainable position. I don't think it's a position that anyone really wants when we get down to the granular. And I think it's a position that will topple eventually. But it takes, at the end of the day, just showing up with love for fellow humans. And I think we live in a society that's so divisive now. And that's the problem. We've been divided and cut up into pies, or secular pies, and we weren't, to the extent that we are now, and that's creating real division and hate. Like Steve was saying, we bring this back to leadership and organizations. What problems is that going to create? Not just socially, because it's a huge problem socially. People's lives are being affected, but also on an economic level. How's that going to affect productivity? If people feel like they can't turn up to work and be themselves, I know as a gay man how that has felt in the past, where I felt the need to hide. And if you can't bring a full self to work, or if you can't lead being a full self, then that's going to create real problems for the economy as well. So I think this isn't just a social issue, which is what some people think. It's not just a political issue. This is an economic issue. This is a systemic issue. But it's really interesting what Steve said today around how leadership and DI are so interlinked, and the challenges that can be created from that.
Absolutely. I think what was really interesting there is we've all got different stories and using slightly different language, but it's all the same end product that we're talking about, is to simply see the person and not to be, Steve called it a clone.
Yeah.
And I that's what I'm sensing about this change that I'm talking about. There is something happening for sure. And I think that what really shone out to me, Steve, when you're talking about is looking at the person uniquely, not as a product or a cog, if that makes sense. Max, I love some of these posts and how strong you're feeling about this change, and I think it's admirable. But that's a much deeper subject to talk about. But I think we're all on the same page with that, which is interesting.
Yeah, and like you say, that's a whole other conversation we could have. But I think it's a really important one to the topic that we are talking about. So we could talk for another hour or 2 hours, and this is such interesting topics. But we are coming to time, and so to wrap up, we've gone in lots of different areas there around DEI, strengths-based work, authenticity and leadership, your personal journeys. I just wonder, for those in leadership who are leading teams, those that are heading up organizations, who maybe are facing resistance to change or are thinking about change and how to move teams forward, what key takeaways we can give to those listeners. So I'll start with you, Steve.
I think the starting point for me is understand yourself. So understand your own strengths, understand your own values, understand what you want to achieve, but then put that same effort into understanding the same things about other people within your team.
Very good.
No, it's all good. All good. I think I cut out then for a second. Steve, thank you so much for joining us. Where's the best place to find you?
You can find me on my website, which is blackflagcoaching.com, or on LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn a lot.
Yeah, I can see it. I absolutely love the work that you're doing on LinkedIn, which is great. And that's funny enough, that's actually how we connected, really, wasn't it? Through Networker on there, which is fantastic. So, Steve, thank you so much for joining us. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, Steve. And we'll include all your details in the show notes as well. Thank you as well, Greg, as always. And yeah, if people resonate with this topic or would like to get in contact with Steve, we're going to link his details in the show notes, but you can get in contact with us as well. And our next conversation is going to be with a coach and mindset and nervous system energetics expert, Lewis, and we're going to be looking at the topic of finding your voice. So thanks both, and yeah, have a good evening. Cheers.
Thank you.